Welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode is a powerful one. I sat down with Julian Bermudez, a therapist and guide who supports people in healing trauma, exploring identity, and integrating psychedelic experiences. And this conversation cracked so much open for me. We went deep into what disconnection from self actually looks like, the defense mechanisms, the inherited pain, the emotional shutdown. So many of us have carried without even realizing it. And most importantly, we talked about how to come back home to yourselves, to ourselves. If you've ever felt like your feelings are too much, like you had to hold it all together, or like your needs were never really seen. I think this conversation is going to speak to you on a deep soul level. Julian shares so much truth about what it means to attune to yourself again, especially when no one ever showed you how. So let's dive in. When you go beyond the surface and into the depths of who you truly are, you will rise. Julian, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. I'm excited for our conversation. I'm excited to see where we take things today, what comes through from just your experience, my experience. So first and foremost, I'm so grateful. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
So I'm curious from your perspective. One of the things I feel like a lot of people, maybe this is just because we're in this world, but a lot of people are on the path of healing trauma and reconnecting back to themselves. And so what does being disconnected from ourselves actually look like? And how do we maybe unknowingly, subconsciously lose touch with ourselves?
Yeah. There's a lot of ways that we become disconnected from ourselves, and there's lots of ways to identify it. Very frequently, I ask people, what are you feeling right now? Just in conversation when I'm working with people as clients. And very frequently, the answer is, oh, I don't know. Or when I ask, what are you feeling? And they say, well, my day started off like this, and then my coworker did this, and then my partner's a real jerk, and then my mother-in-law, so on and so forth. And we can just see there's no connection to the actual feeling. We're not in tune to our emotional experience. It's all mental. It's all up here. And that's an indication of the adaptation that kicks in when we go through trauma early in life, which is we don't have the resources to deal with the pain, so we go away mentally. We distract. And so the easy way that I find is just asking, what are you feeling right now? If there's a numbness, if there's a mental construct that comes in, there's perceptions, there's beliefs. I feel like I'm disrespected. Those are not feelings. Those are mental perceptions that we have. What we're feeling is I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm scared, I'm ashamed. And if we cannot tap into and be attuned to those emotional experiences, chances are we're disconnected.
It just came up as I'm listening to you say that, even just that distinction of the emotions is like an emotional, like emotions 101, because the amount of times that we don't even know this distinction of what are actually emotions. And I can't remember where I heard this, but maybe it was in a book, maybe it was a podcast or something. Removing, even just the simple thing, I feel like, and that already is taking us away from the emotion. So just even simply sitting with the I feel, and what is that? And that's really hard. And I mean, I feel like I can attest to, for a long time, like feeling very disconnected to myself, the emotions. And I even notice now, especially in the time that I'm at in my life of doing just a lot of inner child work, I guess you could say, it's interesting what comes up of avoiding the emotion, avoiding the feelings that we have attached to the experiences that we have, and how oftentimes it's almost like we start to, at least for myself and my own experience, you start to make excuses or jump into other perspectives. And again, in a way, the way that I look at it from my own experience is just defending my parents before I've even allowed my inner child to acknowledge the feelings and the experiences that she had. And that's just only has created such a bigger disconnect in what I've noticed over the last few months of just how disconnected I was from myself, and even just allowing myself to feel and be honest about that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a rationalization, a justification, and then you nailed it, a defense. So when we get to the real emotional experience, from what you've just described to me, it sounds like at some point feeling emotions was dangerous or threatening, or perhaps somebody wasn't there to attune to your emotional experience. So, you could just try to express an emotion, I'm scared, and then if your parents are busy or stressed or they're not present or they got all their own things going on, they say, oh no, there's nothing to be scared about. And so you can't actually engage with that emotional experience because you learn that your parents are telling you don't engage with the emotion, that's bad. And so we have these defenses that kick in that will keep us away from those emotions. And it can look something like that, like, oh, I can't say anything bad about my parents, they were great, they did all these things. Okay, so in other words, you have to take on your parents' emotions. You have to take care of your parents' emotional experience. And that is an indication that very early in life, the roles were reversed. And they might have been really well-meaning, really well-intentioned, but something happened there that caused a disconnect inside. And that's what we're trying to address.
Oh my gosh, I'm like, yes. Because it's interesting because I've been on this journey of personal growth and personal development and healing for the last 10 years. And it's interesting how it just gets even deeper. And for me, I think, well, I know that it's very, I guess in a way, like I'm very hyper aware, hypersensitive, and maybe even just more attentive to exploring and excavating the stories and the beliefs. And that's primarily because I'm on this journey of welcoming motherhood and welcoming that new chapter into my life. And that brings up a lot of like fears and just a lot of being able to like navigate and look at all the things that I didn't receive as a child. And it's so, oh my gosh, it's a lot. And it's powerful though when you can really start to acknowledge. And I find maybe this is something that you can speak to, is that challenge of being able to, as adults, being able to be here in the here and now. And I guess we can make sense of things in ways of what's happened to us. For me, a long time it was coming to the defense of my mom specifically, or just things that happened, how things had to be. And I'm curious to, can you speak to how can we as adults still be able to acknowledge the experiences that our inner child had or did not have, even though maybe as adults we can kind of rationalize it a little bit more or have a bit more understanding?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's two different experiences that are happening simultaneously. There's the mental experience, which you're describing very well. The rationalization, the logic, it happened because of this, explaining it, or it needed to be this way. The defense mechanisms. That's what this mental experience is it's a defense mechanism. Because when we go through pain and we don't have the resources to navigate that pain, we have this wonderful mechanism that kicks in. If you can't make the pain stop by setting boundaries, you can't go away physically, what do? You go away mentally. And we create these mental narratives, these fictional stories to justify or to take us away and disconnect from the second experience, which is the emotional experience. Now, this emotional experience is very important, especially early in age. I'm doing a video right now on early childhood emotional development. Children are born into this world. They know how to express emotions. Every 2-day-old baby is going to let you know when they want to be held or when they want to be fed, but they don't know how to regulate emotions. They don't know how to process or soothe their emotions. And so there's this Harvard experiment that they did, this study, where they have a mother who's actively engaging with her little toddler, participating in the emotional experience. The toddler's happy, putting her hands up, and they go hand to hand. The toddler points over here. The mother looks and comes back. And the toddler's expressing all of these emotions, and the mother is participating in that emotional experience. She's attuned to that emotional experience, meaning that she can actively engage in that emotional experience with that baby. So then the experiment kicks in and she stops participating in it. So she just goes blank face, just like if a mother's staring at her phone, for instance,
Mhm.
or is not attuned to the emotional experience. And the baby, in a matter of seconds, goes into full panic. And this is an emotional circuit that we have here. It's called the panic grief emotional circuit. It's referred to as the call the loved ones home. So if a baby bird falls out of a nest, panic grief gets activated. It calls the loved one. The mother picks the bird up, brings it back to the nest, comforts the baby, and the panic resolves. But what happens when the panic is happening in the child, the human child, because their needs are not being met, meaning that the parents can't be attuned to their emotional experience? The panic kicks in, they start screaming, crying out, and maybe the parents are getting modern advice saying, don't hold your kids when they cry. Let them learn to self-soothe. Let them learn to become independent. They need to do that because you got to go back to work. You got to go take care of your own stresses. So then this baseline panic is what develops, and it never resolves. And so we have all this underlying pain, and it's a big threat just to have that panic. So we have to disconnect from it. We have to go away mentally. And you can see it in this very short 2-minute video from this Harvard study that this baby immediately goes into panic and starts disconnecting from her mother, starts looking away, pulling away, and then starts contorting her body in all sorts of senses, turns red in the face with all this panic. That's the emotional experience. And then the mother reattunes, reconnects to the emotional experience and starts participating in it again and engaging with it. And what happens? It resolves immediately.
Gosh.
So that's what we really need as children, is somebody to participate in our emotional experience with us. But for the most part, that is very far from the normal right now. In fact, it's very normal that the opposite's happening. Either our parents are too stressed, too busy, too worked up with finances and their jobs and their own pain to be participating in it, or they're carrying around too much of their own pain to begin with, and all what they know how to do is to share that pain. So when you come to your parents and you say, Mommy, I'm scared, I'll give you something to be scared about. Or if I'm angry that my needs aren't being met, well, I'll give you something to be mad about. Or I'll put you in a timeout and disconnect from you even further, meaning I'll threaten you with the thing that's most important, the attachment. So we have so many customs that are driving this disconnection right now, and this is something we really need to look at with our children. We really have to learn how to hold on to our kids.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you shared that. What that reminds me of is I had an experience a couple months ago with my husband, just feeling so completely overwhelmed and completely dysregulated. And thankfully, him, I guess, just sensing that and knowing that. And we had this moment where we just stood in the kitchen and he just hugged me and held me, and I just cried. And immediately you have that release. And of course, it's important to have that safe space. But what that reminded me, and especially having conversations about that too, is, how do we expect our kids to self-regulate if sometimes we're not able to self-regulate? Sometimes we need someone else to be able to co-regulate with us, to give us that safety and that experience and that comfort. How do we expect children who are 3, 4, who don't necessarily have all the words to even be able to express how they're feeling? And I get it. Of course, we have like different stresses of life. There's all these aspects, but I think it's again, and I'm not like speaking from the lens of like I'm a mom yet, but I have a lot of like nieces and nephews, and just being so mindful of even when it shows up, and just how can you really like give them that attention, because that's what a child is ultimately looking for, and it's,
Yeah,
I think,
they need it.
unfortunate. Yeah, exactly. It's prime. It's like, that's what we
Yeah.
need.
They can't survive without it.
Right.
Like literally, that attunement is dependent on our survival is dependent on that attunement. This is well known, is that if you take a newborn baby and you keep them warm and you give them nutrients and you don't hold them, that baby will actually die. That's why if you go into like a NICU in the hospital with all of the newborn babies, they have people there whose job is to hold these babies. It is so important. And the reason for that is again, we don't have the ability, we're not born with the ability to regulate our emotions. Dan Siegel refers to this process as interpersonal neurobiology. And that's a really fancy word for meaning that the unregulated, immature, undeveloped nervous system of the baby that is developing exponentially over these first 10 years of life, that it downloads the information on how to regulate itself. The nervous system is downloading information from the mature, regulated nervous system. But again, what happens if your parents aren't attuned to you? Or even further, if your parents aren't attuned to themselves? So their nervous system isn't mature, and it isn't regulated, and it isn't developed. In other words, they never learned it from themselves. These children never will be able to learn that. And so then we become adults and we don't know how to regulate our own emotions. Most of the times we don't know how to recognize our own emotions and say, wow, I'm really dealing with some big emotions. I'm scared, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm ashamed, whatever. And it's overwhelming. I don't know what to do with it and I need some help. We don't have that vocabulary or that awareness to even see that, let alone to process it or to express it or to nurture it and comfort it ourselves. So when we're doing this, as you were calling it, a lot of people call this inner child work, we're literally going back to that unregulated, undeveloped, immature, childish part of our nervous system that still exists. And we have to be that mature, regulated nervous system that will show us how to regulate. See, when I hold a baby, I was holding a little child and his mother was heavily addicted and so was his father, and his father was, it was a very traumatic situation for both parents, and now they have a kid. And so I'm holding this, 3-month-old baby, and he would cry so much. His face would turn red, he'd get nosebleeds, eczema, just rashes all over his face, asthma, couldn't breathe, all of these problems. Why? The emotions of stress that he was dealing with, the stress and all these emotions, he couldn't regulate it. It was just too much. It was overwhelming, and he had nobody showing him how to do it. So when I hold this child and I give him the contact to my body, and then I regulate my nervous system, and I tap into that peace, and I show him this is what you do with that nervousness, this panic, this stress, because I know what that feels like too. And so I can tap into that and then show him. And what happens? Baby stops crying and starts to have color come back to his face and starts to relax and latches onto me and holds onto me. Why? Because he's never had that before. So when we're doing this work with ourselves, that's exactly what we have to do.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I'm curious too, like what's been your journey of coming onto this path, like and especially the work that you do. I'm curious what led you on this path.
Well, I can go into details about my childhood. I'll keep it short, though. My parents were super young, and they were the parents or the children of immigrants. My grandmother on my dad's side's native Mexican, fleeing Mexico, is trying to escape ethnic persecution. My grandfather on that side is Hispanic Puerto Rican. And so he came with hard slave mentality. Children are there to be work, labor, right? Free labor. And so my dad grows up with this mentality of, one, being ashamed of who you are, and two, only being there to provide things for other people. And he was 19 when I was born, and then my mom was 20, and she was a stripper, and she was, her mom was German, moved here after the Second World War, so not exactly a strong foundation to build on. And so they bounced me back and forth. My mom lives in a trailer park after lots of low-income housing. But we move into a trailer park that's next to a landfill. Never even thought twice about that. And so I bounce around a lot as a kid. My dad doesn't want me. They always see me as the bastard son of a stripper. My mom doesn't want me. She sees me as this half-brown hybrid kid. And she doesn't have the capacity to be around me. She's making it my problem. And so at a very early age, I found myself on my own. And I had to come to reconcile with the truth of the situation, which was my parents didn't want me. And it was less painful to go out on my own and to figure out how to navigate the world. So when I was an early teenager, I was already on my own. And this pain of not having anybody, and just like you were talking about how we rationalize, justify, one extra thing we do is we blame very frequently. It's your fault I feel this way. And so my parents did a lot of that. It's your fault that we couldn't be there for you. It's your fault that we had to kick you out. It's your fault that you weren't a part of this. So deep-seated beliefs of unworthiness. I'm not good enough. I'm defective. I'm not worthy. I'm not deserving, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And in my early 20s, I really wanted to figure out not just how to survive, because that's all I had ever done, but how can I actually enjoy life? And that's when I really went onto this path of how do I transform this pain? And through a series of things, going to the university, studying clinical psychology, addiction psychology, not getting the answers that I wanted there, going into the healthcare system and seeing how this system is perpetuating all of the same traumas that I went through while also minimizing or denying them and also exacerbating them at the exact same time. It was like, wow, I can see why my parents behave the way that they do. This is the entire system.
Yeah.
And so, really just trying to figure out how I can take some accountability, responsibility on my own and transform my own pain. The more I was able to do that, the more I stepped away from those systems and structures and tried to create something new. And that's when people started to really come and see me on their own.
Wow. What does, in like your experience and your journey, what did that accountability look like? Because, and I'll speak to just, I guess, from my own experience with my parents and like what I'm coming to like let rise to the surface and just understanding it. And by no means have I had that same experience that you've had, and so I don't want to create any comparisons whatsoever. I come from the lens specifically of my dad not being around, and for a long time my understanding was he chose not to be part of our lives, like me and my sisters and my family. He chose not to be there. I mean, that may not necessarily have been the actual case, and that is what it is. But how do you take accountability in your experience for that? What did that look like for you? What were you taking accountability for? Because I think it's important for us to also, when we're on this path and when we are doing this work, and I think you said it so beautifully, that we want to learn how to live. We just want to be able to experience this beautiful life. We all deserve that. That is like our birthright coming into this world, to be loved, to enjoy this life. And so what specifically did that look like in terms of accountability?
Let me ask you a personal question real quick, if that's okay.
Sure, of course.
Yeah. When you were telling me about your father not being around and him possibly making the choice to not be around, what were you feeling?
Oh, there was so
right
much
there
anger.
When you were telling me. Yeah, that's what I saw. Anger. Now, I can identify that easily because it's inside of me too. Okay, so now the question becomes, okay, yes, things happened that were painful. Your dad wasn't around, my parents weren't around, they blame me, and of course I'm fucking pissed about that.
Yeah.
Well, there's a part of me that's pissed, and there's a part of you that's really angry. Do we really want to carry around all that anger all the time? What are we going to do with that? So whose responsibility is it to work with that anger? Is it our parents' responsibility to come back and to make the amends and to change it? Of course not. They're not capable of that for the most part. I wish they were. I wish that our parents could come to us and say, you know what? I really messed up. I dropped the ball. I wasn't there for you. I did all these things. I hurt you in these ways, and I affected you in these ways. And you know what? I'm going to do things differently. I'm open to hearing how I hurt you, and I'm going to do everything I can to do something different. I wish that was the case. And unfortunately, our parents just weren't mature enough to get that. They didn't get it themselves. They didn't have a parent who was attuned to them. This is intergenerational that we're dealing with. They learned it from somewhere too. So that's what we're dealing with. That's what's inside of us, is this lineage of intergenerational trauma. Our parents have it, our grandparents have it, their parents have it. We can't even find where this thing originated from.
Yeah.
So carrying around this anger or this combustible ammunition that anybody can trigger at any moment and it will explode on them, that's our responsibility. So the first thing is really being aware of what ammunition we're carrying around. And in this case, we both got a lot of anger. And when there's anger, there's always fear. And when there's fear, there's a threat. There's something that's going to hurt us, so there's pain as well. And there's probably a good deal of shame for having it as well. That's our responsibility. Now, what I mean by responsibility is the ability to respond to it, to be connected to it, Just like we were talking about the attunement our parents were supposed to give us and their parents were supposed to give them. And just like in that study that I was talking about, the still face baby, when our parents are not attuned, we have all these big emotions. So what we need to do is we need to be connected to those emotions that we carry. And then we need to respond to them. We need to engage with them and participate with them and say, yeah, I carry around a lot of anger. Yeah, that's really inside of me and I can feel it right now. It doesn't take much for me to find it. What needs are underneath that unmet anger, or that unprocessed anger? What unmet needs are underneath that anger and that fear and that sadness and that shame and that disgust that I carry? Why are they there? So my response to these emotions, my taking responsibility, is I'm going to connect with them and I'm going to try and relate with them and I'm going to ask, what's the teaching here? What is this anger trying to teach me? Okay, the anger is here because I have unmet needs. I have unmet needs, I have boundaries that were constantly crossed and there were constant threats. So what do I do with that? Well, when I was first feeling those, what did I really need? When all these things were happening to me when I was a kid, and all this anger was building up and boiling over, what did I really need? Did I need somebody to fix it? Did I need somebody to come in and set the boundaries for me and make everything go away and buy lots of things for me and, give me a house and all that kind of stuff? I didn't need any of that. What I really needed was somebody to see me, somebody to be with me, to see me, to hear me, to understand what I was going through, to accept what I was going through, to give me a hug and say, wow, yeah, you're really going through it right now. This is overwhelming. There's so much happening right now, and you don't have the resources to deal with that. Here, come. Let me go through it with you. That's what I really needed, and somebody to do it consistently. So then the responsibility is, I got to do all that stuff myself.
Yeah. Mm. I love, because I feel like as I'm listening to you, I'm like reflecting on my own journey, and I truly believe in a lot of what you say. And to be honest, my relationship with my dad, there was so much healing that happened, and it was like the premise of me even writing my first book, and it was just all about being able to shift that. There was so much blame. There was so much blame that I had towards him. And then, finally recognizing, and I was probably like early 20s, kind of at that same period. And I was just like, wait a second. I don't want to carry around this guilt. And to be honest, my mom had said something too, and I completely brought to my awareness how bad I was carrying a lot of anger towards my dad. And she had said, she was like, Ashley, you don't have to hate the world. The thing is, obviously, I didn't hate the world. It was just the amount of anger that I was holding specifically towards my dad, things that he, of course, didn't do, and not showing up in the inconsistency, really. But that moment where you're like, I don't want to carry this anger around because, for lack of better words, I know this sounds cliche, but it doesn't serve. Like, I suffer in the end holding the anger, walking around with this anger. I'm the one being impacted. And that's why I think for me, and I truly believe as well that we choose our parents as well. And at least for me, there has definitely been like this soul contract with my dad, and he's here to teach me so much, and our relationship is here to teach me so much, and to be able to learn forgiveness through him, and to unconditional love and unconditional forgiveness, and that piece I think is important too, that we learn about when we start to see our parents as well as humans, and we then start to see, well, what was their experience as a child. There's a lot of information I think that we can pull from that as well, and we start to see how it goes back beyond. And like you said, we sometimes can't even pinpoint where it even comes from.
Yeah, so blame's not helpful for anything. In fact, the pain that they carry has spread onto us. So we carry around the exact same pain. And you can bet that when we have kids, it's going to spread onto them too, because that's just what it does.
Yeah.
So to blame our parents is also to blame ourselves, and that's not helpful for anything. Now, anger serves a very specific purpose. It's one of those emotions that it lives in the moment. So if you're walking around and somebody is having an episode in the streets and they come and start grabbing you, you're going to feel anger and you're going to try and push this person away. Hey, don't touch me. And that is a healthy expression of anger. But where anger gets very toxic is where we don't do that. And we've learned at some point that anger is bad. If you're angry, you're going to get a timeout. Or if you're angry, I'll give you something to be mad about. And we learn that expressing anger is dangerous and threatening. And so we learn to suppress that anger and to bottle it up and hold it in. And it becomes like a pressure cooker where it's just constantly building up over time, and then it pops and it goes all over all the people who are closest to us. So the anger is there for a reason. It's an emotion that lives in the moment. And we've really got to go into that pressure cooker of all that anger and start to soothe it and to comfort it. And the way that we do that is a lot of the times by expressing healthy boundaries. When we start to forgive our parents, that's not to release all accountability. We can't say, okay, you did this because you were in pain and I'm blindly going to allow you to do whatever it is that you want to do. I think a lot of times we tend to have this really polar view in our society where it's either this or it's that. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
You can have relationship with your parents and uphold boundaries. And that's what that anger is there for, is to express when a line is being crossed and how we're being treated. So the anger can be really useful if it's processed and expressed in real time.
I'm curious. I want to ask you a thought on forgiveness. There's that, the saying, forgive but don't forget. Do you believe in that? If so, why? Why not? I'm curious your take on, I guess, the forget part.
Yeah, I think everybody's situation's different. And forgiveness is, when I work with people, very frequently they come in and say, I want to forgive my parents. And I ask them every single time, what does forgiveness mean to you? And like clockwork, everybody's like, I hadn't thought of that. And then they sit back for a couple minutes and then they give me a version, a first pass of what forgiveness looks like. And then I ask them questions and then we distill it down. And then eventually they come to some solid form of what forgiveness looks like to them. But everybody has some variation of it. So I think that the forgiving aspect is different for everybody. And it depends on your situation. Now, with my parents and my family, the forgetting part is like their first line of defense for all the things that happened. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to acknowledge it. That's where they're at, is they will just pretend that this did not happen. And then when it gets to the point where they can't pretend that it didn't happen anymore, well, then it's your fault. Then the blame comes in. So, forgetting is an interesting thing. I think that remembering is a much more psychological, active activity than forgetting. So I think that remembering allows us to take accountability and responsibility to ensure that we don't continue to do those exact same patterns that caused the pain to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think that's essential in forgiveness, is I can say, I understand you did this thing because this was all that you had known. My mom only knows toxic, abusive relationships. In fact, that's what connections look like to her, is abuse, conflict. That's the only way that she knows how to connect with people. So I don't blame her for that, right? I don't hold anger and resentment of constantly feeling the anger towards her. That's just all that she knows. And I can't let that in my life. And I can't have somebody who only knows how to have conflict showing up at my door trying to start a fight, that's a real life experience. So I think that forgiveness requires a high level of remembering, a high level of awareness, of being aware of what happened and what the pattern that caused the pain is. And then we have to take accountability for it. We have to make choices. We have to cultivate agency to do something different. And we need to be able to hold each other accountable for that. I think that's what forgiveness looks like, in my opinion, is we can have a relationship and it cannot look like the thing that caused the pain to begin with. We need to grow into a new level of connection. So I think remembering is really, really important for forgiveness.
Yeah, I really love that. And I feel like, too, what you were saying, I feel like I'm going to sit with that too, because it's interesting. I mean, I feel like I've gone from, forgive but don't forget, and then swung to the complete opposite side of the pendulum where, I think there's a layer to it in the sense that, when it came to my relationship with my dad, and when we really had this like first conversation that initiated a lot of this healing and forgiveness, I felt like it was very important to, and maybe this is actually the accountability piece that you were talking about, is not dangling or always holding the past at the forefront, because then I feel like there's a disconnect in the forgiveness. It's forgiveness with conditions almost, in a sense, or I guess in a sense maybe love with condition, because I don't think my father and I could continue to have a relationship if it was always, when something were to happen, it's, just, well, you've done this and you never were there for me. And if I'm constantly in this reminding of it and in that space, I don't think that is a level of forgiveness that's true, that feels authentic. Like that to me is not forgiveness. There has to be like a willingness, and on both sides. I think what you said of just that accountability piece is really important to continue to move forward and have that relationship. And sometimes it means we don't continue relationships, and that's okay too, when we have those boundaries and we have that respect for ourselves, like you were saying, of those that might still have the toxic behaviors. And sometimes we have to set those clear boundaries and not have those people in our lives. But I think there's also the possibility, and maybe this is me, but like I believe in change. I believe in, and it comes down to willingness too. And of course we have to see that effort on both sides of the spectrum, really.
Yeah, everything changes. That is the inherent rule of this reality. And sometimes people will resist that change and do everything they can to depress that change, to hold it underwater like a beach ball until the very end.
Yeah.
And yeah, if we're going to have a relationship with somebody, if we're going to try to forgive them, and you're talking about this dangling of the past, yeah, that's the pain from the past showing up in the present. And if we want to have a relationship, so if you and I want to have a connection, but we've had terrible pain from the past, that's going to keep coming back up until it is processed, until it is resolved, until we have a level of attunement, connection, coming back to engaging with that emotional experience. And again, who's the one carrying around the combustible ammunition? So I can't expect my parents to soothe the pain that I carry at all. If I were to do that, I would be disappointed and let down, and I would be in even more pain for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And it's not their responsibility at this point, right? So I can do all of my own work. I can heal all of my own pain, and it's up to them to do the exact same thing. And if they don't do that, then the pain from the past, those patterns are going to keep showing up in the present. And that's where we have to have boundaries, where we have to say, whatever the boundary is for us, we've got to be able to feel and be attuned to that anger and say, okay, a line is being crossed here, not okay. And it's going to have to look like this, or this is what's going to have to happen, or this threshold's going to have to be crossed, whatever it is. So that pain from the past showing up in the present is just an indication that the pain hasn't been processed yet, and there isn't a level of attunement. And maybe what that pain really needs is to be seen. I still carry around a lot of pain from my childhood, and my parents have never been able to see it. And they have denied it, and they have blamed me when they couldn't avoid it anymore, and then disconnected from me entirely and said, well, I don't want you in my life if you're going to bring that up. And so then whenever they come around once every 10 years or whatever, and they show up at my door, they start making phone calls, they want to pretend that stuff didn't happen. And then the pattern continues, and it just goes round and round again. So a lot of the times what that pain needs is an acknowledgement. The attunement that we didn't get still has to exist in some sense. I don't need my parents to resolve what happened, but they do need to acknowledge the role that they played in it, and they have to make steps to not continue to do that same pattern. If those two aren't present, then we just keep going around and around and around. And, that's what some people do. And the relationship is more important than the authenticity, than the expression, than the boundaries, than the ways that we need to be treated and our needs. So they continue to sacrifice themselves to maintain that attachment. That's what some people can choose. But I don't choose that. And I know a lot of people who can't do that either.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the acknowledgement piece and the seeing of the pain. And I don't necessarily just mean you specifically, but maybe even just clients that you've worked with, but just, I guess, in general, when there's trauma that we've experienced. And I guess what happens when we don't get that acknowledgement of the pain, how can we still, do we acknowledge our own pain? How do we still
Hmm.
navigate that when we can't get that acknowledgement?
Yeah. So the relationship that we have to ourself, that's a mirror for how other people are going to treat us. So if we don't have boundaries with ourselves, if we suppress, depress our own emotions, disconnect from them, that's what other people are going to do too. So if I can't acknowledge my own pain, I can't acknowledge or recognize my anger, my sadness, my fear, whatever it is, how in the world could I ever expect somebody else to do the exact same thing? So if I want somebody to acknowledge the way that they're hurting me, but I don't acknowledge the pain that I carry around myself, how is this ever going to work? So first and foremost, what we need to do is we need to become attuned to our own emotional experience. And we need to learn how to take care of our own emotional experience, to participate in it, to engage with it, to nurture this emotional experience. And so when my mom shows up at my doorstep, first time I've seen her in over 10 years, and she shows up with her husband. And the only time I've had any contact with them is when she calls me up or sends me some messages on social media to tell me I'm a piece of shit and she hates me and she doesn't want me in my life, so on and so forth. And I'm psychotic and all these things. And then they just show up at my house. If I'm not attuned to my fear, to my anger, and to the pain of, whoa, what's going on here? And her husband's going to try and grab me up right away and, do whatever. And then within minutes, he's name calling and insulting and blaming and all this stuff and screaming on the top of his head. It's like, oh, yeah, okay, here's the pain from the past in the
Yeah,
flesh. We don't have to look
yeah,
far to see it. Now,
yeah,
how do I get them to recognize that? Well, they're not going to, because that's what connection looks like to them, is conflict. It's betrayal. It's asserting yourself onto somebody else. It's bringing somebody down. That's what connection looks like to them. So I can't expect them to do the work and to see that and to start to do their own things, but I can set a boundary and I can say, if you're going to talk to me like that, you're going to get in your car and leave. And that's how I take care of my own pain. Is, yeah, it hurts not having a relationship with my parents. It's brutal. And I've worked with so many people who have very similar relationships with their parents. And what we have to choose is it more painful to go alone and to take care of my own emotions and to have boundaries of how people in my life are allowed to treat me? Or is the pain of the separation too great and I'll let people treat me however they want to treat me as long as they stay in my life? This is a fundamental choice that we have to make. And this was a choice that we had to make as kids at a very early age, is we're dependent on the attachment and we're wired for authenticity, meaning that we can express our emotions. What happens when your expression threatens your attachment? One of them has to go, and you're dependent on the attachment. So always we sacrifice ourselves. And this is the pain from the past showing up here again, giving us another opportunity to make a different choice. So whatever choice people make is up to them, but being aware of those variables is very important for making that choice.
yeah. I've always said, with awareness, there's so much power. I know that sounds so cliche, but then it's with awareness that we then get to make choices. You continue down the same path, you continue doing the same thing, or you get to choose differently. Yeah, of course, there's
Precisely.
going to be some hard choices that we have to make. And unfortunately, unfortunately, it is not having specific relationships with family. And then you get that whole layer of like but blood. It's the narratives that we hear
Gaslighting.
very often, right?
Yeah.
It's these narratives. And I think, yeah, I really just love what you said too. I think, how can we navigate if we can't even acknowledge it ourselves? And that's where the awareness piece becomes so powerful. The trigger, it changes. And it's, I find, at least noticing, is just being, when you come to the awareness, and it's not like, oh, the behavior changes immediately. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it's just in that awareness, then the amount of time that we spend in the anger or in the blaming or in whatever it is starts to diminish, because we're starting to recognize it faster and faster. We start to regulate, we start to have that attunement faster and faster. But the responsibility, and I don't say this in such a way that can sound so glooming, but like, you can look at things in in two ways, right? It can seem very daunting to say it's my responsibility. It could look like, wow, this is my responsibility, and it can feel like a pretty empowering thing that you get to choose and you get to decide too.
Empowering. That's the clutch key part of this decision right here. So yes, you're right. Awareness is the prerequisite for choice. And then what we're going to choose is, are we going to be a victim? Because if we're
Yeah,
blaming other
exactly.
people constantly, we're always somebody who's been hurt by somebody else. And our emotional experience is dependent on somebody else's actions. So we're a victim. We're helpless. A victim is helpless. And a victim needs to be rescued. So we're always waiting for somebody to come and save us. And we're helpless and we can't do anything. That's one option. And the other option is, am I going to take responsibility for myself? In other words, am I going to become powerful? Am I going to say that
Yeah.
my emotional experience is independent of other people's actions? Don't get me wrong. People can do things that will hurt me. People can do things that'll make me scared and make me angry. I live in Portland, for crying out loud. There's a lot of things that happen that scare me out here. And I can take care of myself. I'm powerful and strong enough to take care of myself. And that's the key thing here is, are we going to become our own heroes? Are we going to become the people that we've been waiting for to come and save us? We have to do that for ourselves. Otherwise, we just spend our lives in that victimhood. One of the first things that we have to come across when we start to take accountability for ourselves and make choices is what's referred to as the compassion of truth. And this is one of the first steps in a healing journey, is when you start to take the inventory of all your suffering and you say, okay, well, I have been making choices to sacrifice myself. I've been a people pleaser. I take care of my parents' emotions. I sacrifice myself to please other people, to maintain my relationships with them. So what will happen if I stop doing that? Or I've always been in relationship with people who trample on my boundaries. So I don't even set boundaries anymore. So what'll happen if I start to have boundaries? This is the first part where we have to be compassionate with the truth of the reality that we're living in, which is, if my relationships have been based on me not having boundaries and people have profited from me not having boundaries, when I start to set boundaries, I'm going to lose a lot of those relationships. And that is going to be painful. And it's a short-term pain that can lead to a greater capacity to engage with and to enjoy life. To where if I ignore or I avoid that short-term pain, I don't acknowledge that first truth, the pain of the truth of this reality, then that's going to continue for the rest of my life. So this is the first part here, is when we start to make choices, is a lot of the times it can be more painful in the short term. And we can lose relationships, we can lose connections, we can lose entire patterns in our lives because they were based as adaptations to a pain. And when we start to pull those adaptations out, then we're just left with that pain. We can process that, we can work with that, and we can engage with that, and we can start to do things differently. But the first step is we have to be willing to not be a victim anymore, and we have to take the responsibility for the pain that we carry.
Mm. Oof. It's just so much truth, and I've never heard anyone say it in that way. And I love it so much. And I love just all everything that you have shared. I think it's just so powerful. And I do want to talk, because I know a lot of your work is surrounding, like, you've experienced a lot with psychedelics and that you bring that into your work. And I'm just curious as well. I've only had, very limited experience. I've experienced, once, but such a powerful experience that I had with a mushroom and cacao ceremony. And I'm just curious, from your experience and especially this work, how this goes hand in hand in your words and what you've experienced, how these are just supportive, and how psychedelics is supportive on this journey of healing and transformation.
Yeah. Yeah, we could spend the whole time talking about just this right
I
here.
know.
Psychedelics are so powerful in terms of the things that they can do when we have that experience. One of the things that they're really well known for is increasing our awareness. So you have this experience and you see how big this world is, and you see how small the pain that we carry around is. Or even though it feels so big and so overwhelming at that time, we can see for this experience that That pain is just one small dimension of the reality that we have, and there is so much more that we can focus on. So expanding our awareness is first and foremost a part of this experience. We're plugging into billions of years of information that has co-evolved with our bodies to have this experience. So we connect so deeply with what it means to be a human being, what this world is, what the dynamics of this reality are. And when we have those types of experiences, the way Paul Stamets says it is, we tend to be less assholes. So we're not so mean to ourselves and not so mean to everybody else. We could start to be a little more compassionate because we understand things a little deeper. One of the other main characteristics of this experience is it prompts neurogenesis, meaning that we can build new neurological connections very quickly. So if we're stuck in these patterns that are harming us and we don't know anything outside of that, this experience is one where we can experience something completely outside of the old pattern. And we can build the neurological connections to have that experience very quickly. So if we have something like addiction, treatment-resistant depression, major depressive conditions, this is an opportunity to have something completely outside of that experience and to show us what it would look like and feel like to live a life outside of what we've been doing. So in other words, this is an experience where we connect very deeply with our own potential. And we see all the things that are stopping us from reaching that potential.
Yeah. I love what you said of just that expanding of the awareness. I think that is like such a powerful piece of just like sign me up. Like, like if we can do it, like it's just getting out of that mental chatter that we have going on. And sometimes we don't even realize we're in this loop that's draining and not supportive, not serving us, and just being able to come out of that.
Precisely. So when we have those psychological defenses that we're talking about, so we get very mental to disconnect from all of the feelings that we have. A psychedelic experience is so good at getting that conditioned mind, the way, the perceptions of the way that we look at things, and all of those defense mechanisms that are just the normal. That's just how it is. We don't know anything outside of it. So good at taking that and getting it right out of the way. So quickly too. Of course, if we start to have this experience and we are not prepared for it, it could be very challenging for us, and it could make things a little bit more difficult for us in the short term. It can exacerbate our pain in lots of ways too. So we want to take a lot of care to prepare ourselves to go into that pain and to work with it beforehand, and to really work with those patterns and to connect with them and relate with them beforehand as well. If we can do that, when we have one of these experiences, we can go straight into those patterns and say, I'm going to soothe this and I'm going to do something different. I'm going to comfort myself. I'm going to nurture myself, whatever it is. And then we use that experience as a tool to go so deep into it. And it can be incredibly healing. I've seen people walk away from addictions like that. I've seen people with suicidal ideation, like high level, incapacitating depression, where they've spent their whole lives in this state and they're on their last step. This is the last thing that they're going to try. And in just a couple weeks, one of just doing the therapy, because all my therapy is based on this experience. Like, I know how to get people into that experience just from talking, just getting into it. And then having one of these experiences changes everything, and it can do it so quickly. That's not to say that you're cured, that the, major depression and the suicidal ideation and the addiction is just gone forever. Your ability to relate with it and to engage with it and to make choices increases so quickly. So then you can see, why is this depression here? Why is this suicidal ideation here? Why is this addiction here? What is it trying to teach me? And what can I do differently to engage with this and soothe it? And that can happen so quickly.
I feel like those are two of the most powerful things that we can ask ourselves is, why is this here? And what is this here to teach me? There is so much information we can get when we allow ourselves that space to sit with the pain, sit with the emotions, sit with what's there. But
right.
I've always said that it requires such a level of like curiosity to like do this work, and that willingness to ask yourself those questions, or ask yourself the question and receive the support to be asked those questions. That
Yeah.
the container I'm sure that you offer, and seeking someone out that understands, that has the space, that has the tools, and also the knowledge to be able to be that guide for you is such a powerful thing. And I think I'm realizing even just recently too, of just even myself and asking for the support, of just how powerful it is to say, I need the support to navigate this, to understand this more. That is, and that's so empowering. And the thing is what I've learned from that and through these choices of asking for help, and especially when I connect with the right people and that right person that's offering me such good support, it's this
Hmm.
reassurance of, wow, I'm so grateful I trusted myself. And
Hmm.
again, it's just
Yeah.
coming back to that piece around us feeling empowered. That's what it feels like. It's never felt like, oh, I can't support myself through this. It feels like the most empowering thing to say, I made this decision for myself, and look what's coming from it because I trusted myself enough to say yes, to
Yeah.
ask for the help, ask for the
Yeah.
support.
Yeah, precisely. You're talking about being attuned to yourself and being vulnerable enough to allow somebody else to be attuned to you as well. And when we go through pain early in life and we don't have anybody who's there to attune to us, what ends up happening is we get a defense mechanism, a belief, a core belief is what I would call it, about ourselves, that I have to be strong, independent, and do everything on my own. In other words, I'm still playing out the same victimhood. I have to do that because nobody's ever been there for me. And when we're trying to attune to our emotional experience and we've never been able to do it before and we never had anybody to show us how to do it, it's like trying to put together a large puzzle, but you can only look at it from a couple inches away. So you don't know what any of the pieces are, and you don't even know what the full picture looks like. And you're just trying to fit pieces together. It doesn't go anywhere. You might get a couple of them that fit, but you still have no idea what you're doing. So the vast majority of our pain develops from interpersonal relationships, from interacting with somebody or from not interacting with somebody, not having somebody there. And so if we're going to heal a lot of that pain, to do it in isolation, to do it alone, isn't going to work. We have to be willing to have the interpersonal relationships. And that allows us to have a deeper relationship with ourselves, exactly as you're saying. It's really empowering to open up and to have somebody there to help you with this. And yeah, that belief of I have to be strong, independent, and do everything alone is very common and very powerful. And that's a good message I like to share with people is you don't have to do it alone. And we're not meant to do it alone. If we were to look in history, you look at natives, First Nations, indigenous, you look at the lineage that I come from, when people are sick, when people are hurting, they don't give them prescriptions and then send them off to go live in an apartment by themselves. No, the community comes around and they encircle them. And they all see this person and they see the pain that they're carrying around. And they sing and they chant and they drum and they have a ceremony for this person. And they bring them back into the community. And they say, the pain that you were carrying is a blessing for our community because it shows us where we have become disconnected and it gives us an opportunity to reconnect. So it's so much gratitude for this pain. And here in our culture, we really believe that you have to do everything in isolation. And I don't think that that's true at all. And I think that is the cause of a lot of pain itself.
I agree so much. When I think about that, I, again, like I kind of was telling you at the beginning, is a big, my center is calling in, motherhood. And I think about that even too, of just what our indigenous knew, and how they celebrated and welcomed and how they supported the mother, not just the baby. And I think even there's just that acknowledgement too, recognize of just, when someone has a baby and it's like they go beeline straight to the baby and to meet the baby, and it's like not forgetting about the mother, and having people
Yeah.
rally for the mother. There's so much that we have lost, and that we can, again, I think this is part of what I love of learning about the indigenous and what we've lost, is just bringing this back, and just how this is supportive to us as human beings, and how, just call it colonialism and all this, just, it's not how it's meant to be done. It's not meant to be in isolation, alone, or in silence. That's not how it was meant to ever be done. And bringing that back in, and just in community and circle and ceremony, as you were saying, that's how it's all meant to be.
Yeah, very important. Very important. And the vast majority of indigenous cultures and non-Western cultures. So if you watch the
Yeah.
Ghibli film Princess Kaguya, Japanese, you'll see how their interpretation, at least, of the villagers, the village life, and you'll see that the little babies don't really touch the ground ever. And that's how it was in hunter-gatherer cultures and in native cultures. Babies didn't really touch the ground until they were maybe 4 years old. They were always held, not just by the mother, not just by the father, but by the entire community. There was always somebody there to participate and to offer support. And this idea of the nuclear family, the father, the mother, and then the kids being isolated from the rest of the community. And we don't even have that anymore, where mothers are raising children completely on their own with no support, having to go to work 2 jobs just to barely pay. They're stressed out. They can't afford anything, and they have no capacity to engage with their children. I see it every single day. And yeah, this is something we really, really need to bring back. We need support for the children and a lot of support for the mother. We don't need to be debating about whether abortion should be legal or not. What we need to be debating is how can we support mothers to the point to where they don't want to kill the baby because they're too stressed to deal with life. We really need to start to focus on how can we support mothers and families and children again. And I'll tell you, I see this in the healthcare industry very frequently as mothers have their babies and they'll say, okay, the baby is now 6 weeks old. Can I stop holding them? Can they go to daycare? I need to get back on with my life. And it's like, wow, that baby is so dependent and can't survive without you. And now they're going into the system.
Yeah. One thing I heard recently, and I don't know the exact piece around it, but the baby feels like, or doesn't know the difference, or doesn't even know that they're fully like separated from the mother until about like, I don't know if it's like 12 months or maybe more than that. I'm not exactly sure. So there's even that where they're still trying to get their bearings of they're not inside the womb anymore. They're not part of the mother anymore. So imagine just 6 months, 8 months, whatever it is, and okay, goodbye. Like it's
Or
wild. And
6
for me,
weeks.
that brought oh my god, yes, because also too, I know in like America, in the US, it's different in terms of mat leave and things like that. Like it blows my mind
Yeah.
that that's a
Yeah. And
reality, and it's so
in the
unfortunate.
States, 12 weeks is like the pinnacle of what most people get. And the vast majority of people don't even get that. And that's
Exactly.
including the time that you have to take off right before your labor or to prepare for labor. 12 weeks, which is what people get here, is nowhere near enough. What we really need is, one of my teachers says, the first 3 years of the baby's life are crucial. If you get these 3 years right, you can kick back and relax because you've got the foundation underneath you. But if you don't get those first 3 years right, you're going to spend the rest of your life trying to make up for it. So what we really need is we need parents to be able to have the resources and the ability to put their personal lives on hold for 3 years to take care of their children, and they have to be attuned to their child's experience. So if this child doesn't even know that they're separated from the parent, that's an indication that the parent really needs to be connected and present with the emotional experience of their children. And if you can spend the first few years doing that, then you help your child build up enough emotional flexibility and maturity to navigate hardships and losses and fears and angers in life. They know how to recognize emotions, and they've had somebody attuned to them where they know even if it's too much to deal with themselves, there's other people around to help them. So they're not alone. That's where independence comes from is from dependence. And that's what we really need to be focusing on right now, is really attuning to our children and to ourselves, because you can't give it to somebody if you don't have it yourself. And if we can do that, I think that changes a lot of things.
Yeah. And someone said this to me, someone that I had on the podcast, who's a dear friend. She just talked about as well about how it all begins in the home, and yes, there's so much happening in the world right now, but we really do have to focus and hone in on our homes and our family life, and what's happening at home, and that creates a ripple effect. I think when we know and we believe that it creates a ripple effect in the world, like that's important to know, but it all begins in the home. That's where the power happens. That's where the change really starts to take effect, because we're raising the next generation. Of course it's going to go into the world and make that difference.
Yeah. You could use the home as an analogy here for your body or for your own inner world. And rather than going outside of your home and telling everybody else how to fix up their homes and how to run the community out there, first thing is you've got to turn your attention inward and you've got to take care of all your own emotions. And you've got to be attuned to yourself. And then you can help your family do that and your kids do that and you can build out from there. But yeah, we absolutely have to, if we want to see change, for ourselves, for others, for the world, first and foremost, we have to turn our attention inward. The more that we focus outward in the world and try and change other people and other things before we take care of our own selves, we're just continuing those exact same patterns. We've got to start with reconnecting with ourselves. That's first and foremost of the precedence of a lot of the problems that we're dealing with right now.
I love that. And for, I guess, to kind of like wrap up our conversation, for those that are tuning in and in kind of feeling this space of wanting to, I love that word, the word that we've been using is attune. I love that so much. So what would be an invitation for those that are in this space of wanting to attune more to themselves and to create more of that connection to themselves and I guess repair that or heal that disconnection? What is a small invitation that you would leave with those that are tuning in?
We have to make a practice of making ourselves a priority. Right? If we didn't have somebody attuned to our emotional needs, that means that we weren't important enough to have somebody attuned to it. That's the belief that we get, is I wasn't worthy, I wasn't important, I wasn't deserving of it. So we have to make ourselves a priority. The way that we can do that is we say, okay, 3 times a day for however long we can do it. The amount of time that we do this for is not important in the beginning. What is important is that we do it. So if you can do it for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, great. If you can do 15 minutes, 30 minutes, fantastic. You must be experienced already. Wonderful. And all that you do is you have a spot where you sit. You get rid of take your phone. You can set a 5-minute timer. You can set a 30-minute timer, whatever you can do. But you don't look at that screen. It's on do not disturb mode, whatever. And you just sit and close your eyes and you take some breaths and you just turn your attention inward. And you just notice what is present inside your experience. You can look at physical sensations, like is my stomach and my gut in knots and constricted, and is there a weight and a tension or a fleeting feeling in there? Is my heart throbbing? Is my breathing labored? Is my chest weighted and heavy? Are my shoulders really tense and constricted? Is my throat all dry and choky feeling? Is my jaw clenching down? We just want to go and notice those things. So for 5 minutes, we're just going to sit and we're just going to turn our attention into whatever we're feeling. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to change it. You don't have to get rid of it. All you want to do is say, what I'm experiencing is important enough for me to pay attention to it. And I'm going to pay attention to it for 5 minutes, 3 times a day. And that allows us to start to build a little bit of a foundation to reconnect with what we're experiencing. Of course, that's just the start. We want to start to build a relationship with it. We want to start to connect with what we're experiencing and get curious about it and ask it questions. How often do I feel it? When did I first start feeling this? When I was feeling this, what were the things that I needed that I didn't get? And then we want to do all those things. But spoiler alert, just paying attention to it and being with it and listening to it is usually the start of all the things that we needed that we didn't get. So that's the practice. 5 minutes, 3 times a day. What's 15 minutes out of the day? I spend way more time looking at stupid videos on YouTube.
And that is, I mean, we learn how to put ourselves, make ourselves a priority. It's exactly like you said, just that simplicity thing and knowing that we deserve that attention. You know, when we're just mindlessly scrolling, the world is getting our attention. Outside of you is giving your attention, but the power come when we turn inward. There's so much power in that. So I love that practice. I feel like I'm going to take that away.
Yeah, please. Companies get your attention, and they design their products to be as addictive as possible to take your attention. And so they're based on the premise that you're in pain, and this is how you're going to soothe that pain, is by buying our products and staring at our goods and all of our information. Don't let other people have all that power over you. Take it back. Start to reclaim your agency, make choices, and cultivate your own empowerment for how you're going to live your life. This is a fantastic way to start.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm so, so grateful for you, Julian, truly, for everything that you shared for this conversation. I'm really so grateful. I can't wait already to go back and listen to the conversation. So I just want to thank you so, so much from the fullness of my heart.
Likewise, I can only have these conversations with somebody like you because you've done some of this work yourself and you're doing it too. So when I asked you, what are you feeling? You said, oh, I'm angry. That's pure anger. Yes, that's a testament that you're doing it too. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having this platform too.
I'm so grateful for Julian and the depth that he brought to this conversation. What really stuck with me was the line about making yourself a priority through presence, through attention, through choice. And I'll be honest, so much of what we talked about today reflects my own journey. I spent years feeling disconnected, numb, and constantly looking for external validation, looking to prove my worth, wanting to feel worthy. And it wasn't until I started writing, and I mean really writing with myself, that I began to hear my own voice again. And so that's why I created this mini writing ritual called Write to Heal, a nourishing way to really sit with yourself, to feel what's actually there, and to begin rebuilding that attunement that Julie and I talked a lot about in this episode. So if you are curious if something stirred in you today, this might be the next step. You can download it through the link in the show notes. And most importantly, just remember that you don't have to do this alone. You were never meant to. And continue to really honor your truth and continue to remember that you are a priority, and what you have experienced matters and is important, and that is deserving of being seen and heard and loved. So until next time, until the next episode, we'll see you soon. Thank you for listening. Make sure to leave a review and continue the conversation with me over on social media, and we'll see you in the next episode.